Sometimes life surprises us in ways we could never predict. In the midst of the daily routine and stability of my marriage, I began to feel a void growing inside me. Everything changed the day I walked through the doors of the gym. The smell of sweat, the sound of weights, and most importantly, the intense gaze of my teacher, a man who seemed to carry the passion I longed for. As I taught myself to lift more weight, I delved into a more risky exercise, the exercise of exploring the attraction that grew every day. And so, the line between good and evil began to blur as the secrets that lived in my heart became impossible to ignore. As soon as I walked through the door that morning, a deep tiredness took over me. Routine had become a monotonous cycle, and the flames of passion that had once lit my marriage seemed to have gone out. My husband and I were a team, yes, but the emotional connection we once had was fading. The small moments of affection became rare and the conversations mere formalities. It was in this search for a little life again that I decided to join the gym on the corner. At first, I was a little surprised by the idea, but I knew I needed something, anything to distract me and revitalize my spirit. When I first arrived, the atmosphere was full of energy and movement, but there was also something else that I didn't expect to find. He was there, among a group of students, his imposing presence attracting everyone's attention. His name was Bruno, the new bodybuilding teacher. With his well-defined muscles and charming smile, he had a confidence that lit up the room. When our eyes met for the first time, I felt butterflies in me and a spark of excitement took over me. As I adjusted on the treadmill, I couldn't help but notice his every move, as if the gym were a stage and he was the lead actor. He reached out to help me, his firm hands adjusting a machine, and in that contact, I felt an electricity that quickly became a well-kept secret in my heart, subtle but full of promise. During those first weeks, I got lost in a maze of innuendos and furtive glances. With each workout, the tension increased. With each interaction, a growing desire enveloped me. The conversations were light, but the subtext was undeniable, fueled as the smiles and provocative taunts increased. I found myself increasingly drawn to the idea of something more, something that would lift me out of the apathy that my life had become. I knew I was flirting with the unknown, but the idea of feeling alive again, of exploring such an intense desire was very tempting. A new world was opening up before me, while the emptiness of my routine seemed to weaken with each passing moment. In each training session with Bruno, what would you do with these feelings? With each passing week, the gym became more than a place to exercise. It was a refuge where Bruno's glances and my interactions made me forget the problems of everyday life. The warmth of his presence was like a magnetism that attracted me more and more. Soon, training became the most anticipated moment of my week. I prepared carefully, choosing each training outfit, knowing that the only thing that really mattered was the time I would be at his side. He encouraged me to go further, to exceed my limits. And this wasn't just limited to physical training. There was an inexplicable connection, something that illuminated every workout. In those moments of sweat and defiance, the smiles exchanged grew longer and, more significantly, I felt there was something more behind his attention, a palpable tension that hung between us, as if the air were charged with electricity. On a particularly exhausting day, Bruno approached me while I was recovering after a workout. "You're doing great," he said in a deep, warm voice. I was so lost in his eyes that I could barely respond. I felt my heart soar as he reached out and touched my shoulder. His firm, warm hand left a trail of desire wherever he went. With each workout, the line between admiration and desire dissolved. I began to imagine what it would be like to be with him away from the gym, in a place where the tension could turn into something more. Imagining his lips on mine was a fantasy that visited my mind during long, silent nights, when loneliness and dissatisfaction became almost unbearable. I tried to distance myself from these ideas, reminding myself of my commitment, but this internal struggle only intensified my attraction. The conversations became more personal, and one day, after finishing training, Bruno asked me about my hobbies. "What makes you happy besides training?" made my heart race. Before he could respond, I looked at him eagerly, my almost explicit desire reflected in my eyes. It was a dangerous game, and he knew it. One day, as the conversation heated up, he leaned a little closer and I smelled him, an irresistible combination of musk and freshness. At that moment, I thought about how I could resist that temptation, leaving everything behind and living this new adventure. But the weight of reality began to set in, bringing to the surface the guilt that had haunted me. What was he about to do? Would my family life fall apart because of a crazy attraction? Uncertainty and excitement became a vicious cycle in which I found myself trapped, but the desire for Bruno only seemed to increase. and the thought of discovering more about this chemistry loomed over me like a fascinating shadow. The line between good and evil became increasingly blurred, and the decision to resist or succumb to this attraction became a constant battle in my heart. Part of me wanted to break free, to feel the excitement of something new, while another part struggled to maintain loyalty and respect for my marriage. As the weeks passed, the line between admiration and betrayal became increasingly blurred. Every training session seemed like a game of seduction. One day, after an intense weightlifting session, I was feeling exhausted, and Bruno approached me, breathless and enlightened, his eyes shining with a pent-up desire that I could feel in every fiber of my being. In his soft voice, he said, "You've tried so hard. Let's do something different next class, just the two of us." Anxiety took over, and I found myself fighting against the possibility of succumbing to this temptation. I decided to book that extra class, and the excitement of being together made the days seem like an eternity. When the time came, I entered the gym with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. There was Bruno, waiting for me, a mischievous smile on his lips. Throughout class, the looks we exchanged were full of silent promises, and the tension was palpable. At the end of class, he took me to a more private corner. "You have a special touch," he said with his gaze fixed on me. The words and the closeness took my breath away, and the idea that we were alone there, away from prying eyes, made me forget all my worries. The desire that had pressed deep in my heart now called for a journey. Before I could think, he leaned in and our lips touched. The kiss was electric, an explosion of feelings that seemed to have been repressed for so long. It was like my consciousness was falling apart, and the only thing that mattered was that moment. After that kiss, the world around us seemed to disappear. The taste of his mouth, the heat of his body. Every fiber of my being asked me to surrender to that passion. But in the midst of all this, reality began to return. A feeling of butterflies in my stomach reminded me of the betrayal that was about to occur. I had a husband who trusted me. With my mind confused and my heart pounding, I walked away and took a deep breath. "Bruno, this isn't right," I said, trying to regain my sanity. He seemed surprised, but he also understood. "No, and I don't want you to feel guilty about it," he replied. "But the connection we have is real." At that moment, I knew I had to make a decision. The idea of unlimited love was tempting, but the pain it would cause would probably finish me. I couldn't move on, even though the attraction was undeniable. When I left the gym, my heart felt heavy. I returned home, but the image of Bruno remained etched in my mind. What would have happened if he had given in? Part of me regretted not following my desire. The other part remembered the vows I made and the life I had built. After days of internal struggle, I realized that I needed to be honest, not only with myself, but with my husband as well. I needed to confront my feelings and restore the integrity of my marriage. One day, while he was watching television, I decided it was time to open my heart. "Love, we have to talk," I said, sitting next to him. As soon as the words came out, his expression hardened. I explained everything about the attraction to Bruno, the kiss, and how that chemistry affected me. The silence that followed was heavy, and I could feel the pain of his emotions. Mistake and sadness were evident in his eyes, but instead of anger, he looked at me with understanding. "I've always trusted you," he said with a trembling voice. "But now, what do we do about this?" The sincerity of his words moved me deeply. I knew I had risked a part of my life, but by opening my heart, I also opened a space for healing. With that conversation, something changed. It was as if everything he had contained was finally free. We talked about the relationship, what was missing, and how we could rebuild the connection. Bruno became a chapter from the past, a lesson in the fragility of love and the importance of honesty. Life moved on, but now I looked at it with new eyes. I learned that desires are just superficialities, but true love, the one that strives and faces challenges, is something worth preserving. And perhaps in the end, this is one of the greatest secrets of the heart, knowing when to let go and knowing when to fight for what really matters. I've added commas, periods, question marks, and quotation marks to make the text flow more naturally and be easier to read. I hope this is helpful, Fernando. Let me know if you have any other requests.